Hi, my name is Ruby Powers with Powers Law Group, and I am an immigration attorney. And I am here to read a book to you. I'm representing the Houston Bar Association. So it is a group of over 10,000 attorneys here in the Houston area, and we help the community in many different ways, from reading to students or community groups. I'm on the Speakers Bureau as well, building houses, donating books to help people who need them, and helping feed those who don't have food, as cleaning up parks, and also giving other legal services. The Houston Bar Association was founded in 1870, and every year volunteers of the Houston Bar Association select a book to read to young people in schools in and all around the Houston area to celebrate Constitution Day, which was September 17th. So Constitution Day, several years ago, Congress passed a law recognizing September 17th as Constitution Day, and Congress wanted to encourage people to take time every year to learn about the Constitution and how important it is to our system of government and our democracy. It's the most important law in the United States, and it sets out the foundation of how our government, our democracy works. So in 1787, the founding fathers, people like George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, met in Philadelphia to work together to agree on a system of government. And the system they agreed to is set out in our Constitution and divides our federal government, national government, into three parts. And you've also often heard of that, right? It's the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. And so, I can't believe it, but the Constitution is already 234 years old. That makes the United States the oldest democracy in the world. So that's really exciting, and it's important to appreciate that. And so I'm going to read to you What's the Big Deal About Elections Vote, and by Ruby Shamir and Matt Faulkner. And did you know that I actually ran for office at one point? And I also was a political science or government major. So I really like democracy and the government, and being lawyers, we're told when we become lawyers, we have to swear to defend the Constitution. And so it's really important to us. And so I'm going to read this book to you today, and hopefully you can follow along. So it says, one person, one vote. Picture the scene. Bonfires lighting up the town square as parades of brass bands march by, floats wheeling caged raccoons, bears and eagles before rowdy crowds, torches exploding into shooting flames. What was all the excitement about? It was Election Day, the way Americans celebrated it about 200 years ago. Kids loved to be part of the action and couldn't wait until they were finally old enough to vote. Life is very different these days, and Election Day looks pretty different too. But one thing remains the same. Americans still vote on Election Day, and when you're 18, you'll be able to vote too. That will be exciting, won't it? This is exciting. Why does that matter? What are Americans voting for, and why is voting so important? What's the big deal about elections anyway? In 1845, Election Day was set for the Tuesday after the first Monday of November. Why then? Well, many Americans were church-going farmers who lived far from the polls. And so they couldn't go on Sunday, but they needed a full day to travel and be back home for Wednesday's market day. I never knew this. And November was after the busy harvesting season, but before the wintry weather made travel too difficult. Very practical. What are elections? Elections are a fair way to make decisions as a group. Say your class gets to choose what to play in gym, and 10 kids say kickball, but only 7 say tag. Well, what are you going to do? Well, kickball has won for that day. Every kid gets one vote, and the choice with the most votes wins. Now, can you imagine getting to choose your teacher or your soccer coach or your parents? Elections are cool, but we vote to choose the people in charge. Yeah, that would probably take too long, right? We elect our leaders to very big jobs like president, governor, mayor. That means those people who get their power from us, the voters, who give those men and women those important positions. The United States Constitution starts with the words, we the people. It's because We don't have a ruler who gets in to be in charge forever. Instead, we decide together what's important and who's in charge. If they're doing a good job, we get to choose new leaders. If they're not doing a good job, then we get to choose new leaders in the next election. So this is a fun photo here. One very big deal about elections is that we, the people, each get one vote. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, strong or scrawny, tall or short, everyone has an equal say in the voting booth. Our government is elected to represent us. So you can see how there's the pictures of we, the people. They're putting everything, they're painting, they're putting things together. In a running race, the fastest sprinter wins. In a spelling bee, the best speller wins. In an election is a different kind of contest. The winner isn't necessarily the fastest or the smartest, but the person who the most voters trust to be in charge or to gets the most votes. So who gets to vote? That's the question. Most American citizens who are at least 18 years old vote where they live, but it wasn't always this way. When the United States was first formed nearly 250 years ago, in most places, only white men who owned a home or land were allowed to vote. No women, no African Americans, no Native Americans, no poor people, no one under the age of 21, and none of them had a say when the time came to pick leaders and representatives in government. Slowly, over many, many years, different groups of people demanded the right to vote, and they won. Frederick Douglass knew that the right to vote in elections was an important part of American freedom, and he demanded the vote for Black Americans who were former slaves because it's our right. He said, without the vote, slavery is not abolished. Native Americans, the first people to live in this continent, were only granted American citizenship in 1924. And so that's about 100 years ago. And even then, it took another 40 years before every state allowed Native Americans to vote. Even though kids like you can't vote yet, your voices still count. You can join with your friends and neighbors to stand up for what you believe in. When African Americans were denied the chance to participate in elections, children protested for the rights of their parents and grandparents. In doing so, they were marching for their very own futures too. You have to be an American citizen to vote in most elections in this country, and anyone born in America is automatically a citizen. As an immigration attorney, I will say very few exceptions to that rule, but we do have birthright citizenship. If you weren't born here, you can become a citizen, though it does take some time and effort, and that's why I'm an immigration attorney. And so here we have some pictures of one man, one vote, freedom register now. We make change on election day with our votes, but we can make a difference every day through our actions. Nearly 50 years ago, 18-year-olds won the right to vote. Before that, voters had to be 21. Do you think kids younger than 18 should be allowed to vote? That's a good question. Kids who were brought to America very young, but without the proper forms to be citizens, are speaking up, declaring they should be considered Americans because this is the only home they've ever known. They may not have the right to vote, but they have a voice and they demand to be heard. So we would call those dreamers. And those are the children brought here when they were really young. And I represent a lot of dreamers, and we're hoping for a DREAM Act so that they can have status more for the future and become citizens later on. So why do we vote? We vote to elect people to lead the government. People who run for office are called candidates. Once candidates win elections, they're called elected officials, and they go to work in the government. But what exactly is the government? For one thing, government's a way to organize, plan, and build things that are far too big for one person or one family to do alone, especially things that we share, like roads, buildings, things like that. We all need roads to get to school or to the store or the playground, but how do we decide where the road should go? Who will hire and pay the workers to pave the road? And what about lighting the road so people can use it at night? Who will make sure that everyone drives safely on the road? Because we all share the road, we all should have a say in answering these questions, and we do. Through the people we elect, we get to decide what our government does. And to pay for the big projects like roads, the government collects money, taxes from all of us. All right. So candidates are trying to get people to vote for them, and the elected official is the one that got elected. Thanks for your vote, it says. One very important goal for voting is to have a say in how our tax money is spent. This was one of the reasons the American Revolution started, to tell the King of England he couldn't tax the Americans without representation, without giving them a say in English elections. And there's a little note, we all breathe the same air, right? A while back, cities and towns were often choked by smog. It's sort of like bad air from cars and factories that spewed out pollution. Americans were fed up with the dirty air and pushed for a law called the Clean Air Act of 1970, which helped clear the air. If we want these laws to stay in place, we have to elect people who care about clean air too. So there's a picture about how they put a cork in it by the order of the people, and then it says, paid for by your taxes. Okay, they put a cork in. Ever wonder why you have to go to school? By 1918, every state had passed a law that said kids had to go get an education. Before that time, many kids would had to go work in dangerous factories or underground and dirty mines. So why does government matter? We live in a very big country. There are lots of things that happen every day that we don't think about because the country seems to run on its own. But it doesn't. Government workers include some of the most helpful people in our neighborhoods, like firefighters, police officers, and teachers. And elected officials in our government make decisions that touch our lives every day, not just in how to build roads and schools and parks, but also how to pay the doctors and nurses who take care of us when we're sick, how to make sure our water is clean enough to drink, and how to keep our medicine and food safe. They make those decisions based on what we, the voters, think is important. Garbage collectors keep the streets clean, waterways fresh, and our bodies healthy by clearing away germs. That's really important, right? Before the New York City's Department of Sanitation, the world's biggest, was established, the city was so stinky that the travelers could smell it from 6 miles away. That sounds horrible. In 1903, New Yorkers were so grateful for sanitation workers that they were cheered at a parade. Choosing who serves in our government is a very big deal. So they were cheered on because they were so happy. If there's an emergency, you call 911 on a phone and help will come speeding your way, no matter where you are in the country. A bunch of government offices partnered with phone companies to set up this special line. The very first 911 call was made from Halliville, Alabama in 1968. That's not too old, 68. I didn't know it was that recent. Who do we elect to lead the government? That depends on which government you're talking about. The federal government, which is one that oversees our whole country, is based in Washington, D.C., and that's where the president and other leaders live. But most of the elected officials stay right in your own state and even your own city or your town. While no states are run exactly the same way, each is led by citizens who are elected by other citizens. Governors and state representatives, mayors and city council members, county commissioners, and even some local judges are elected to make sure everything close to home runs smoothly. Would you believe that more than 90,000 state and local governments in the United States, that's more governments than there are seats in a football stadium? That's how we calculate it, right? Yeah, I mean, I ran for office. I know lots of candidates and a lot of elected officials and judges. And I block walked for other candidates and even for myself. And so I know that, that there's lots of leaders and all of us can be leaders in our community. School board members are elected to make sure that public schools have healthy lunches, art supplies, sports equipment, caring teachers, and good principals. In many states, judges and sheriffs are elected too. Yeah, we have judges are elected here in Texas. There even a time when towns would elect the dog catcher. Oh, that's funny. Who makes sure that playgrounds have safe equipment? How many firefighters can the city hire? Should there be a stop sign on that busy corner near your school? We elect state and local officials to make decisions about laws and these sorts of questions. So what exactly happens in Washington, D.C.? Washington, D.C. is our nation's capital. How many of you have been to Washington, D.C.? Did you know that I went there when I was a high school kid and I got to spend 1 week and I visited all around. I got so excited getting to learn how government worked and made that I later lived there in college and then lived there for 2 years and worked for the Committee on Homeland Security and the Senate office. And so the Senate office, I really enjoyed it and it was very exciting. So in DC, our nation's capital, the seat of government for the whole country, all 325 million of us living in the US are almost 4 million square miles. The White House, the president's home and the office, is there. We elect the president who works with Congress to govern the nation. And members of Congress are elected from every state, and they gather in Washington, D.C. to make laws that matter for the entire country. The House of Representatives and the Senate, the two chambers of Congress, write bills and pass them after debate. The president of the U.S. then signs those bills into law and carries them out. And so then when those become law, then us lawyers have to follow those laws and help people interpret the laws and make sure that they are adhered to. The third branch of the federal government is the judiciary, judges who help settle questions about the law. The president chooses federal judges and they're approved by the Senate. So while we don't directly elect those judges, they're selected and approved by people we elect. So we got some pictures here. And you can see how it's all connected. The voters elect the president nominates the federal judges, the Senate confirms the federal judges, and the people vote for the senators. Different laws can be made for different cities and states, but the laws passed in Washington, D.C. are things that need to be the same all over the country. Like what? Well, from New York to New Mexico, we all need to have fresh water to drink. And from Colorado to Connecticut, we need clean air too. Whether you're in North Dakota or North Carolina, you should be able to use the same money. Congress also makes laws about when to go to war and how to make peace with other countries and how to pay for everything by raising taxes. Each of America's 50 states send 2 senators to Washington for a grand total of 100 senators. And so even though California has tons more people than Alaska, they each have the same number of senators. They each have the same number of senators in Congress. But the House of Representatives, now that's different, has many more people, 435 to be exact. States with more people living in them get to send more members to the House. And because of that, Alaska sends only 1 member to the House of Representatives, but California sends 53. And we do the census every 10 years, and then we find out how many people live everywhere. And then we get to potentially could add or lose congressional seats, depending on how the populace. Now, how do we elect our leaders? It's usually pretty simple. We vote for the person we support and the candidate with the most votes wins. This is how we elect pretty much all of our leaders. But presidential elections are different because we elect presidents through something called the Electoral College. The Electoral College has nothing to do with the school you might go to after high school. Instead, it's a group of people from each state called electors. When we vote for president, we're actually voting for electors in our states who will then turn around and vote for president. In most states, all of the electors of the state vote for the person who won the most votes in that state. The number of electors is the number of House of Representative members plus the number of senators plus 3 for Washington, D.C. States with more people have more electors in the Electoral College. The Electoral College system can be pretty confusing, and there have been 5 presidential elections in our history where a candidate for president won more votes but didn't become president. Those candidates didn't win enough Electoral College votes. So I think those are the elections when people realize that we have an Electoral College, because it's so shocking. 1789 presidential election. George Washington was our first president and the only one elected who didn't run against anyone else. So it's a photo showing that he didn't have an opponent. How do we know who to choose in an election? It can be a tough choice. One way to choose is to listen to what candidates say they'll do. And then, so that's like campaign promises, and then make sure that they keep their promises after election day. We can do this by watching their debates, listening to their speeches, visiting their websites, and writing to them. If they don't keep their promises or do a good job, we can vote them out in the next election. Another way is to learn what political party they're in. Sorry to say, political parties aren't anything like birthday parties. No cake, no candles, no gifts. Political parties are groups that people join because they agree on how the government should be run. And like when rooting for sports teams, people get very excited about them. In our country, we have two main political parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. How can such a big country with so many people have only two choices? Well, we actually do have lots of other smaller parties, but most voters choose candidates from one of those two to vote. The Democrats have a donkey as their symbol, and the Republicans have an elephant. Why? Well, each party got its animal symbol as a joke. When Democrat Andrew Jackson ran for president, he called a donkey as an insult, but he didn't mind and slapped a picture of the animal onto his campaign posters. And Republicans are elephants because a few newspaper cartoonists drew them that way, and it just stuck. Now, as a poli-sci major, I'm learning things here, right? But the most important way to make a decision about who to vote for is to use your head and ask lots of questions. That's good advice. Just about life in general. What's going on in your neighborhood? What should the government be doing that it isn't doing? Is Congress passing good laws? Can the candidates who are running for office make a difference? Even if the person you chose doesn't win, it's still important to vote because it sends a message to the winner and others about what matters to you. General elections in the US usually happen in November, but there are often other elections. That's a really good point a few months before, and they're called primaries and caucuses. In those contests, voters can choose one person in each party who will be on the ballot in election day in November to run against the candidate. And sometimes there's early voting, there's special elections. So there's a lot of elections all the time, especially in Texas. Who can run for office? Anyone who's a citizen and old enough can run for office. Different positions have different requirements, but about how long you have to be a citizen and where you need to live, but that's pretty much it for the rules. To be president, you need to be at least 35 years old and a natural born citizen, which is not super clearly defined, so that causes lots of debate. For the Senate, you have to be at least 30 years old, and for the House of Representatives, you need to be at least 25 years old. For both the Senate and the House of Representatives, you need to have been an American citizen for a while and live in the place that you want to represent. So you can see this photo about the primary caucuses. The presidency has attracted a wide range of candidates over the years. Belva Ann Lockwood ran for president nearly 40 years before women had the right to vote. While Margaret Chase Smith was the first woman to be seriously considered for the presidency from one of the major political parties, Barack Obama was the first Black American to win the presidency, but he wasn't the first African American to run. Jesse Jackson ran in 1988, and before that, in 1972, Shirley Chisholm was the first Black woman to run for president. Her campaign slogan, what she said, she was unbought and unbossed, and she worked hard to provide children with healthy food and doctors when they were sick. So there's lots of great leaders that have run. No matter your hairstyle, taste in food, fashion sense, favorite sport, or current job, you can be a candidate. Astronauts, actors, accountants, and more have all run for office. How young can you be to hold office? One Pennsylvania town elected an 18-year-old to be the mayor. His mom said he would still have to take out the garbage and keep the yard clean, though. Yeah. All right. George Washington Albright was born a slave, but he overcame many obstacles and was eventually elected to public office. When Albright was a teenager, President Abraham Lincoln signed a proclamation to end slavery. Albright then joined a secret group and risked his life to sneak into neighboring slave quarters and announce that slavery was over. Years later, he was elected as a state senator in Mississippi. That's Senator George Washington Albright. So how do candidates get elected? Running for office takes a lot of time and effort. Yeah. Candidates meet as many voters as possible, listen to what's important to us, and talk about how they will stand up for us if they get elected. They meet voters at local festivals, hold large meetings, debates, they block walk, they go to lots of events where people are, debate other candidates, appear in the news. One popular stop for presidential candidates is the Iowa State Fair, where almost any food you can imagine becomes plopped on a stick. Peanut butter and jelly, brownies, pork chops, salad, oh gosh, deep fried butter. Ugh. But to do all of this, candidates need help. That's where you come in. Oh boy. Even as a kid, you can volunteer on a campaign and convince others to vote for your favorite candidate by making phone calls, knocking on your neighbors' doors, hanging up posters, handing out leaflets, campaign buttons, and raising money and speaking out for what you believe in. So when I was running for office, my kids would go on the campaign trail to events. They would block walk, and they've also block walked for HASD trustee and other different candidates. So you can be involved even if you're a kid. Every year on election day, so how do we vote? Well, every year on election day, citizens go to their polling places to vote, even though every state has different rules. But for how it's done, some places have voting machines where you touch a computer or to record your vote. In other states, you have to fill out a paper ballot that gets fed into the counting machine. And that was a cause of debate in an election about 20-something years ago. A lot of them are getting more digital. These technologies are supposed to make voting quick, easy to count, and hard to cheat at. No new technology has been perfect, but we keep trying to come up with ways to make voting easier and more secure. Before you can vote, though, you need to sign up or register to vote. This is another way you can get involved, even though before you're old enough to vote by yourself, by encouraging all the grown-ups you know to register to vote so they can be ready to cast their ballots on election day. Even though we still have one election day in November, a lot of states offer other ways to vote. People can vote by mail and people can vote early, in some places a full month leading up. And people are talking, my candidate, no, our candidate. Election day, if you're away from home on election day, you can send in an absentee ballot. People serving overseas in the military can vote from where they're stationed. Even astronauts can vote from space. What? That's so cool. What happens after elections? When candidates lose elections, they usually go home to their families and go on with their lives, though sometimes they choose to run for office again in the future. The winners, though, get to serve their term or terms in government. When the term is up or they lose an election, an elected official willingly leaves office and hands his or her position over to the next person elected to that role. This is called the peaceful transfer of power. And strange as it sounds, it's a really big deal because it doesn't happen in every country in every situation. Election losers and elected officials whose terms have ended don't start wars to take over the government. They don't stay put and refuse to leave. Normally, they listen to the choice of the voters made and move on, leaving the office to the next person who's been chosen by the will of the people. The peaceful transfer of power shows that the real power isn't in the office or the elected official, but in us, the voters. And that's why it's important to vote on election day and also stay active all year long, paying attention to what our leaders do and say, because in the end, we're in charge. Former presidents have stayed busy after they left office. Former President William H. Taft was appointed to serve on the Supreme Court. Former President John Q. Adams was elected to the House of Representatives. And former President George W. Bush became a painter. They still stay involved. Elections are about making sure the country is safe, prosperous, and fair well into the future. What do you think our government should spend its time on? What do you think our leaders should pay attention to? Good question. So that's important for you to think about. So I hope you enjoyed a reading of the book, What's the Big Deal About Elections? Vote by Ruby Shamir and Matt Faulkner. It was a joy being with you today, and I know we couldn't be in person, but I hope you enjoyed the virtual recording and you learned a little bit about this. If you ever have questions, you can always reach out to me if you have questions about law, about immigration, about running for office, writing a book, any of those things. My name is Ruby Powers with Powers Law Group, and you can find my website at Ruby Powers Law, or you can reach me at my office number 713-589-2085. And if you ever want to talk about any of those things, feel free to give me a call. Thanks so much and have a great day.